Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Chess with Arsalan. In today's video we are going to talk about weak squares in the chess and how a weak square can change destiny of a game and change the fate and overall strategy over a game. And the game that I have chosen is actually one of the games that is an excellent example of this manner, and it was played not quite recently, but it's not a quite old game. It was played between Ivan Cheparinov and Vasily Ivanchuk in the Khanty-Mansiysk FIDE World Cup in 2005. And I'm going to break the video into two parts. The first part is the initial phase of the game and how you can use it, and how this using of the weak square can sort of shape the character of the game. And the second part is the exciting part, which is how to finally use and convert your advantage. And before we start, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, subscribe and click the bell button so you can be notified of the further video. So let's get on to the game. Ivan Cheparinov with the white pieces started with the d4, and his rating was at the time of this game 2618. And we have Benko Gambit and Volga variation, and we are going to join the game after move 11, where white played short castle and black played queen takes b6. And as you can see, the b file is open. So black's idea is to build up on b file, for example put a rook on b8 and try to create an attack on the queen side. And this bishop on g7 is will be actually quite helpful if this diagonal is opened, and can help black in creating attack on the queen side. But there's a big but here. If black has this kind of advantage, what kind of advantage white has? The advantage that white has here is the weak square on b5. And if white ever manages to install a knight on b5 and cement it there, this actually blocks any kind of counter attack by black, because installing a knight on b5 would block the b file, so black cannot use that file very good. Plus options like e7, e6, which attacks the center of the white, will be a little bit difficult to perform, because in that case, after for example e7, e6, white always has options of playing d takes e6, and after f takes e6, for example, attack the weak square on d6 by playing bishop f4, rook to d1, so on and so forth. So this is the overall picture of what can happen in this kind of position. Now it's white to move, and white wants to install the knight on b5, but this knight is defending the e4 pawn. So the first thing that white does is to play knight d2. This gives the e4 pawn extra protection and also prevent blacks from playing e6. Why? Because if black plays e6 now, after d takes e6, f takes e6, suddenly we have knight c4, which forks the queen on b6 and the pawn on d6, and black will be simply a pawn down. So after knight d2, black plays bishop a6, and black is basically trying to control the b5 square, and if he is given enough chances and enough time, he wants to exchange this bishop with the bishop on e2, which relieves some pressure from black's position. But after bishop a6, white plays knight b5 immediately, preventing black from exchanging on e2, and after rook f to b8, white plays queen c2. And this is actually a very important move, because white wants to play knight to c4 in the next move, and again the e4 pawn needs protection, so the queen on c2 is giving extra protection to the e4 square, so the knight can move to the c4. And anticipating that white wants to play knight c4, black plays queen c8, so after knight c4 there is no queen on the b6, and knight on c4 is not attacking the queen. So this was a sort of prophylactic move. And at this moment, black played knight to b6, which attacks knight on c4 and pawn on a4. But before we go further with the knight b6, there's a very important question here, and the question is that can black play bishop takes b5, eliminating this very dangerous knight? The answer is no, because after a takes b5, white's idea is to play bishop d2, attacking the a5 pawn, and after rook takes b5, suddenly we have knight takes d6, unleashing the bishop on e2, and when the rook moves back, for example, knight can come back to the c4 or even b5, and because the pawn on d6 is gone, white has enough mobility to play ideas like f4, e5, and then e6. So exchanging on b5 at this moment is not a very smart idea. Anyway, black played knight b6, and here white played an extraordinary move. He played knight c to a3. But before we jump onto this move, there are a couple of other moves that we should analyze. The first one is that what happens in the case of knight takes a4? This is a free pawn. Can I take it or no? The answer is no, because after knight takes a5, black has two very strong responses to this move. Number one is to play knight takes a4, losing the knight on b5, and even more stronger than that is to play knight b takes d5, unleashing the queen on d8 to the knight on a5. And if white takes on d5 after queen takes a5, as you can see, the pawn on d5 is isolated, it's not protected good enough, and white will have great difficulties defending it. And after knight b takes d5, if white plays knight c6, which attacks queen on d8 and rook on b8, then black has a very strong response, knight b4, counter attacking the queen on c2, as well as attacking the knight on c6. So taking on b4 is forced, and after c takes b4, again, as you can see, the pawn on d5 is disappeared, and this gives black extra freedom to start to attack on the queen side. Even ideas like bishop takes b5 are possible now because the rook on a1 is not protected good enough. So anyways, after knight takes b6, knight takes on a5 is not possible. What about exchanging on b6? Can white exchange on b6? The answer is again no, because after queen takes b6, it seems that white is holding the knight on b5, but it's not, because black can play knight e8, then knight c7, which attacks the knight on b5, and at some point white will be forced to either remove or exchange the knight on b5, and after that the b file will be open and black will start to create counter attack on the queen side. So after knight takes b6, knight b6, knight c to a3 was played, and as you can see, the knight from g1 has jumped to the f3, then d2, then c4, and then a3. And what is the purpose of such a big waste of time? The idea is to simply defend the knight on b5, and this defense cements the knight on the b5 square, and black cannot easily remove it from b5, not with current forces on the chessboard. So knight c to a3. Here black played rook to e8 anyway, so he's still trying to play knight c7, and white in response played rook to d1. And the idea is that white wants to play b3, defending the pawn on a4. So the rook was on a1 under pressure because the bishop was actually hitting the rook on a1. So that's why black decided to play rook to b1 and then b3. Knight to c7, and here black played white played b3, which removes any nonsense with knight takes a4, and we reach to this position. So as you can see, the bishop on a6 is not a very good bishop. It does not have very good future, neither in this diagonal or even this diagonal. So black decided to exchange it on b5, and after knight takes b5, And here Ivanchuk went wrong. He played knight a6. There was a better option here, and it was to exchange on b5, and after let me show you. After taking on b5, bishop takes b5, and to play queen to b8, and black will play something like bishop e5 and then queen to g7, and in this case there is not so much pressure on the black's position. So this was a better continuation, but Ivanchuk had another idea in this position. Ivanchuk put the knight on a6 so he can play knight b4. And as we will see in the game continuation, this will create additional problems for black. So here, white has one undeveloped piece, and it's the bishop on c1. Do you put it on b2 or put it somewhere else? If you put the bishop on b2 with the idea of exchanging this bishop, because you might think that, okay, this bishop is very strong, it's controlling an excellent diagonal. But if you look closer, you will see that this bishop is controlling nothing along this diagonal. So exchanging it will not be very beneficial decision, because, for example, after bishop b2, knight to b4 attacking the queen on c2, so queen d2, take. Again, this position has no advantage for white whatsoever, and black can play queen f8, again installing the queen on the g7 square, and this position is roughly equal because neither side has any active plan. So after knight a6, white decided to develop his c1 bishop from another diagonal, and it was from this diagonal, from h4 to d8 diagonal. So in this case, white is exerting pressure on the e7 square, and after knight b4, again knight c7 was better, but knight b4 was played. White played queen to d2, and as you can see, there's a traffic jam here. So even if white removes his knight from b5, it will take at least 2 moves for black to remove these 2 knights so he can attack on the b5. So this traffic jam here is a very problematic setup for black. And in this position, black played queen to d7, which we are going to discuss a little bit later. There was another possibility for black, and it was to play rook to b7, defending the e7 pawn. And now white carried out his first step of his plan. He installed the knight on b5 and cemented, and it cannot be driven away that easily. Now there is the second part. White wants to play f4 and try to open up these lines and create an attack on the king side. So one of the main sources of defense in this kind of position is to bring back the knight to d7, so it will slow down the idea of e5. Or if white plays a5 in such a position, knight can jump from d7 to the e5, blocking the center. But if white does it here immediately, for example, white plays knight d7 immediately, black plays knight d7 immediately, there is a knight takes d6, taking advantage of the fact that this pawn is pinned and cannot move, and in this case white will have a winning position. So white, after a 4-up from white, black has to play queen e8 first, and after white played f5, now the knight arrives to the e5 square on time. So now black can play knight e5. But rook b7 plan was not played, and black played queen to d7. And after f4, now black played rook to b7. There is another plan for black here, and is to play rook to c8 and hoping to play c4 and open up the queen side. It is not going to work in this position because white can immediately play rook b to c1, and any nonsense with c5, c4 is blocked, and there will not be any compensation along this diagonal, along this file, excuse me. So after f4, black played rook to b7, and here is where we are going to stop the video and discuss it in the next video. So thank you for watching us till this moment, and I'm going to see you in the next video. Goodbye.